Hey guys, and welcome back to Flipped Science. Today is going to be all about the planet Venus. Venus is also often referred to as Earth's sister planet. That's because it has roughly the same size as Earth, but also because it's one of the two planets that are next to Earth, the other one being Mars. Unlike the planet Mercury, who is closest to the Sun, Venus actually has an atmosphere, and this atmosphere is nothing like Earth's atmosphere. The atmosphere on Venus is very dense and heavy and extremely toxic. No human can live on Venus because of this. But actually, the atmosphere on Venus isn't the biggest problem for humans inhabiting the planet. The real problem is actually the extreme temperature of the planet. It gets scaldingly hot on the surface of Venus, and it gets even hotter than on Mercury. Venus is filled with huge mountain ranges, volcanoes, old lakes made out of lava, and meteor craters. It's a very barren and very rough landscape. If you look at Venus with the naked eye through a telescope perhaps, or if a space probe has taken a picture of the planet, then you'll see a lot of clouds, and that's because the atmosphere is so dense. That means we can't actually see these mountain ranges I was mentioning before. To see those, we have to employ some very clever technology, but it's also very old technology. It's called radio waves. And these radio waves are so long, the frequency of them is very, very large compared to the visible spectrum that we usually take pictures with. So that means that these long radio waves can actually penetrate the dense atmosphere of Venus and show us what Venus truly looks like underneath its cloudy cover. Perhaps the most famous and biggest volcano on Venus is called Mad Mons, and it's even bigger than anything we can see here on Earth. It's incredibly large, and you can see a couple of pictures of it on your screen right now. Just like Mercury, Venus has no moons. And this may be because the planet doesn't weigh as much, or because it's close to the Sun, or for some other entirely different reason. But the fact remains is that it's one of the two planets in our solar system that has no moons. Like I mentioned earlier, it gets extremely hot on the surface of Venus. And that's because of this incredibly thick layer of atmosphere that surrounds the planet. And this atmosphere acts like a huge winter coat for the planet. And when the sun is smashing the planet with its heat, all of this atmosphere, all of the molecules in the atmosphere absorbs the heat and keeps it near the planet Venus. And this means that it actually gets up to 450 degrees Celsius on the surface of the planet. That is 50 degrees Celsius more than on Mercury. This thick winter coat I mentioned can also be called the greenhouse effect, and you will hear a lot more about that in school or in my other videos. But basically, it's what keeps the planets warm. And on Venus, this effect has run rampant. It's crazy how hot it gets on the surface of the planet. Venus may be almost as big as the Earth, but it's actually only weighing about 20% of our planet. That will roughly compare to Venus weighing the same as a child and the Earth weighing the same as two grown adults. The atmosphere on Venus consists almost exclusively of the gas CO2, carbon dioxide. And this is the kind of gas that we generate here on Earth when we burn fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas. It's also what is being emitted from our cars, trains, planes, and all those sorts of things. Anything that has an engine, really. And this gas is also called a greenhouse gas. Just like I mentioned earlier, greenhouse gases can be really good because they help keep a planet warm, but too much of it is a no-go, and the planet will become too hot for any living organism to live on. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, the atmosphere on Venus is incredibly heavy, and it's actually 90 times more heavy than the atmosphere on Earth. The atmosphere on Venus is incredibly dense, and this also means that it's heavy. So if you're standing on the surface of Venus, you're actually being exposed to a pressure from the atmosphere above you that is more than 90 times that of the one on Earth. And that means any living human being or regular animal from Earth will be crushed under this pressure. It can be a bit hard to imagine exactly what pressure is, but imagine that all the air on top of you, directly on top of you, that goes all the way into space, it actually has a mass and it weighs something. And it's actually leaning on your shoulders when you're walking on the surface of Earth. And the pressure exerted on you on the surface of Venus is equal to the pressure of being about 1 kilometers below the surface of the ocean here on Earth. And no human can survive down there. Only specialized sea creatures can survive at that depth. In 1982, Russia actually managed to land a space probe on the surface of the planet of Venus. This space probe was called Venera 13, and it managed to survive roughly 57 minutes before it was crushed under the extreme pressure from the Venetian atmosphere and scorched by the extreme heat from Venus. But it did manage to send back one picture from the surface of Venus, and you can actually see it on your screen right now. Quite spectacular to have a real picture of the surface of Venus. Venus rotates around its own axis incredibly slowly, and it's actually faster at getting around the sun one entire time than it is than revolving its own axis one time. So as you can imagine, the days on Venus are incredibly long, but they're actually even longer than a year on Venus. Quite odd, I know. If we compare this to Earth, then a day on Venus is actually 242 Earth days long, but a year on Venus is only 224 Earth days long. So it's the other way around. It's quite odd, to be honest, that everything is backwards. And finally, the planet Venus is named after the Roman goddess of love, beauty, and fertility.